Hi, my name is Jan, and in this video we're going to be looking at Bambu Studio. Now Bambu Studio is quite an amazing software and it's a very good slicer to use when it comes to 3D printing. So I'm going to go through just the simple stuff. So we're not going to tackle any of the advanced options when it comes to Bambu Studio. So let's start with the beginning here, and what we've got is I've basically got in 3 cubes put together there, one object, 2 objects, one's green, one's yellow, and the idea then is to try and print them nicely together like that. Now, first thing we're going to start with is we're going to follow through every single option that we have available here. So starting at the top left, first make sure you've got the correct printer supply chosen. Check your plate. Also a good idea to synchronize your filament and synchronize with the printer. Currently my printer's not plugged in, and that's fine. Then from there we're going to look at the next option, which is flushing volumes. Now we are going to be flushing white and green to be able to make our multicolored picture. Now if you look at the volumes, this is the amount of flushing that's happening and then between the different colors. Now you'll see there's 3. Let's just get rid of one of them. So let's just delete that one. Let's go back to flushing volumes. You'll see that there's the 2, and you'll see how much of green needs to purge to get back to white and vice versa. Now as a rule of thumb, 1 is usually pretty good. A lot of people do say try and drop that down to maybe 0.8, even as low as 0.5, and that's going to reduce then the amount of filament that gets flushed. Problem is, if you don't flush enough, you're going to have bleeding. So especially in this case of green and white, there's going to be bleeding of the green into the white and vice versa, and you'll end up with these little lines across your models. So always make sure that your flushing is enough. So I'd say in this case 0.5 generally is good, but I would go at least 0.8 flushing on this one. Now looking at the next option down, we're looking at, we've got our 2 filaments, we've got both PLA basic, nice and simple. That's what's in the machine. We'll leave it like that for now. There are more advanced filament options as well, which we're not going to cover in this video. Next we're going to look down, we're going to go to the strength. So standard printing with this is we're looking at 0.2, and we've got a 0.4 diameter filament in. So what does that mean? It means that our walls when we print it is going to be 0.4 thick and it's going to be 0.2 high. Now we can alter this layer height as well. The thing is that the higher you make it, the more chances are that you're going to see layer lines. So what that means is that if we want very smooth objects, we then decrease the layer heights, and that's what we're looking at here. So that's why 0.08 will be very high quality, 0.16 is good. For this, 0.2 is fine, because we're just going to do a standard little block. Now the next thing here is we're looking at layer height. So the layer height now is 0.2, and it's usually been set by the option here. Like I said earlier, we can make it less. Would not recommend going much higher than 0.2. You can go up to 75% or 0.75% of thickness, which means 0.3, but it's not recommended. Initial layer height, so your first layer height in some cases you want to make it thicker than the second one. That could be for adhesion, could be specific to your specific object. Let's talk about seam. So before we're looking at seam, we've got a few options when it comes to seam. So first one is a line. So you'll see that on here seam is marked in white, and you can see we've got a seam over there when it's going to print, a seam over there and a seam over there, which is fine because that's where we want the seams. It's not going to be obtrusive, it's not going to spoil at all. Let's say you didn't want a seam, and maybe you're thinking of creating a random seam. Now random seams can cause problems for certain filaments, so I would not recommend random unless it's really what you want to do. So you'll see now that those little blocks, white dots, are all over the place. So instead of having a thick seam, it's going to have the little random seams all over the place. What is a seam? It means that when the print gets done, it starts at one point, goes around, lifts up, moves to a new spot, goes around. So instead of doing that concentrically and one going up, it then moves around to its new start point. That can cause blobs at times. So I usually say stick to aligned, that's your safest bet. Okay. Next option we're looking at is what's called top surfaces. So top surface is obviously this top surface here. Now if you look at the slice here, you'll see that there's a wall, and then we've got our surface. Now if we go a little bit deeper, you'll see that there's two walls, and when we get right to the top, there's only one wall. So it says here only one wall for the top surface. I can say that don't apply it, which means it's going to give us two walls, because later on you'll see that we're asking for two walls. We can also say we're only going to do that for the top surface, and we can only do it for the first layer. Right, so purely cosmetic. Next option then we're going through is strength. Now strength, we're going to look at wall loops. Now for most things, two wall loops is enough, okay? And for small objects and things, 2 is fine. If you want to create more strength, you increase the wall loops. So what does that mean? So firstly, if you look at the number of loops in here now, you'll see we've put it up to 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wall loops now. So now let's think thickness. So if your nozzle is 0.4, 6 times 4 equals 24. So that's going to be 2.4 millimeters thick, to give you an idea of how thick that wall is. So by dropping this down, let's drop it down to 2. Dropping it down to 2 is going to be 0.8 millimeters. And this is where you can then look at the top shell layers as well as the bottom shell layers. So if you want the top shell layer to be 1 millimeter thick, remember we are printing at 0.2, so 5 times 0.2 is 1 millimeter. If we make this 4, we're going to make it the same thickness then as the walls. So it's just something to bear in mind. And you can do the same then for the bottom shelf as well. So that means that you've got the same thickness of wall and top and bottom shelf for this object. Again, what's the top shelf? That's the top layers. So you see we've got now 1, 2, 3, 4 layers like that. So let's look at the shelf pattern. There's a number of different ones. You can get concentric, which gives it these cool lines like that. Reticular, monotonic line is probably the most commonly used one. You also get some really cool ones like the Hilbert, which is really cool, but it just takes forever to print it. So just be aware of that. This will create, you can see now suddenly that's 4.5 hours to print. 4.5 minutes to print. 4 hours and 34 minutes to print. We change that just to plain monotonic. Look at the difference in time. We save ourselves about 10 minutes. Okay. Next option is paint penetration. Great. So paint penetration is where you've got different colors. So you'll see here we've got a green and white sticking together. So when we get to that level there, you can see the paint is penetrating like that. Okay. So you can then set the amount of layers for that paint penetration to happen. Okay. This is a bit different because I've got separate objects, so they will bleed into each other quite specifically. You also have what we call bottom paint penetration. Now, bottom paint penetration is, let's say you're making a logo, for example, and you want to have the letters to be 3 or 4 layers thick. You can say, right, I want that bottom paint penetration to be 3 layers high. Okay. 1 is generally not enough, especially if you're going to use highly contrasted colors. So I usually say 3 is great. If you need more, go for 5. Then you get your internal solid infill pattern. Okay, now that's a pattern that's going to be right down at the bottom here. So your first pattern, okay, is going to be monotonic. Then as it goes up, you'll see it changes. Okay, so it changes from that monotonic to little crisscrosses. This is probably not the best model to show it on. But basically what that means is that instead of being just the lines, it then creates another pattern. Again, you can control that. Doesn't make much of a difference. So let's talk about infill. Now infill, there's a lot of debating on what's your best infill, your strongest infill. For models like this, grid is fine. Okay, if you want something that's stronger, I like to go for either 3D honeycomb or adaptive cubic. Okay, what I like about adaptive cubic is adaptive cubic often saves you some filament, especially on larger objects. So for here, for example, you can see how it's changed that filament, that infill completely. And we can see that our filament uses 77 grams. If I change that to, let's say, triangles, for example, you're going to see that now we're using 79 grams. So adaptive cubic can actually save you a bit of filament. Percentage wise, again, the stronger you want to make it, the more infill you give. However, your strength actually lies more in the walls than the infill. So it's very seldom that you would use more than 25% infill. Okay. Again, if we look at then, remember that was 79 grams. Now we're going up to 84 grams. So your whole project becomes heavier and you're using more filament. So you need to decide whether it's worth it or not. Let's talk about support. Okay. So if we look at support, this is what support is. So here we've got tree support. Okay. And you can see it's these beautiful little lines. The reason for that is because of what's happening with the filament purging. So if we take the support away, what's going to happen? We're going to get these warnings saying that, oh, we're going to have a disaster in that area. So enabling supports, there's basically two different types. You get normal support, which forms these little blocks, and you can then decide how do you want it. If I use normal, I use the snug, which is not really an option when you use just the standard settings. But in the advanced settings, you can then actually go and choose snug. Now, going back to your threshold angle, so think about it, anything that's going to be under 30 degrees is literally going to fall over. So always a good idea to keep that. And then if you place on build plate only, it's only going to place your supports on the build plate. It's not going to place it on top of other parts of that. So you always have to bear in mind you need to remove the stuff. Right, so then we're looking at next is what we call a raft. So you can then create a raft. I'm going to say PLA1, which is white. So what a raft is that instead of printing directly onto the plate, it prints a little raft like that. So I can then choose exactly which color raft I want. You can see this one is white. If I change it here, it's going to go to green. Or you can just choose default. Default, it will choose whichever one it's going to be. Now I prefer default purely because what's going to happen, it's going to actually purge some of the filament into that. So instead of being just white or just green, it's going to use a combination of the filaments. I hope that makes sense. And let's get to the last tab. Now the last tab is quite an interesting one. Older printers used to print skirts, and you can then print a number of loops if you want. This is if you have issues with cleaning the nozzle. So just to make sure your nozzle's nice and clean, you've had issues with clogs before, then it's an idea to just have a skirt like that. I hardly ever use them. Next one is a brim. Now a brim, what a brim does, it's going to create some additional around here. So if we go out to perimeter brim, what this is going to help for is adhesion. So sometimes what happens is that there might be certain projects that you're going to need a brim to keep it stable onto the plate. And this is where you can then set that. Outer brims are most commonly used. You can have an inner brim if you've got a hole. You can have inner and outer or no brim. I usually choose automatic. Usually it will decide whether you need one or not. So let's talk about prime towers. So this funky little thing over here is called the prime tower. Okay, and the purpose of a prime tower is to prime the nozzle with the new color. So because we're going to have colors that's swapping and changing here, and you'll see then that that's going to change also with the layers depending on which colors it's going to use. Now, big debate on whether you need one, also the size of it. I find that if you want to avoid bleeding, good idea to have a prime tower. Rib wall, again, debatable on whether it does anything. That's totally up to you. It uses so little filament. I mean, if you look at it, that's like 8.6 grams of filament. So it's really not a lot of filament that gets used for the towel. So it's worthwhile keeping it. Next, talking about flushing options. Now remember, we've already set some of the flushing. Okay, so we're already flushing a lot. Another option is to actually flush this into the infill. So if we look at inside here, you're going to see that the infill here is, we've got two different colors, white and green, but the infill is solid white and solid green. So if I then flush into the object infill, you'll see now that that color's actually changed. Now suddenly there's a bit of white infill in the green one, green infill in the white one. And as you go through the layers, you can see how it's actually flushing some more of that color into there. Again, this is going to help prevent bleeding. So especially if you've got two contrasting colors like the white and the green, the more you can flush before you print, the better. In this case, you're not actually wasting filament. You're just using it a bit more optimally. And you'll actually see now that our number of grams have gone down because we're not flushing as much elsewhere. You're now flushing it straight into the filament, into the object. Right, so let's do the next one. Next is going to be your sequence of the model. So if we go and we just, I'm going to just split the model up like this completely. So I've got two different things now. Okay. So another thing that you can do then is you can actually print one object at a time. So instead of printing by layer, I can print by object. Now what's going to happen is I don't need a prime tower anymore because I'm not going to change nozzles. So if you look at how the printing is happening, there it's printing the white, there's printing the green cube all on its own. Green cube, done. Then it goes and it starts printing the white cube. Okay. So that's another way of printing multiple objects, even different colors, on the same build plate if you want to. Okay. So let's just change that back to by layer. I'm actually going to just delete my one object for the next one. So next mode is what we call vase mode or vase mode, and I like to use spiral. Not really much of a not much of a fuss. So anyway, what vase mode does is going to print a single layer in a single floor. So if you look at it now, we're going to end up with a little box, and it's like a little vase. That's why it's called vase mode. And the way that it prints now, which is quite interesting, so instead of the head moving all over the place, it actually goes in circles like that. So as it goes along, it just prints in little circles. So it literally just goes round and round and round and round and round and round until it's done. Okay, look how little amount of filament it's using, 1.93 grams. So I would often use this as either for a vase itself or just to get an idea of what it's going to look like if I want to print something. Time lapse, this is all about your printing. You can do a time lapse on the printer, you can have the traditional version or smooth, and then fuzzy skin. Fuzzy skin is a fun one, so let's just take these off. Fuzzy skin came along to, I'm just going to put on all walls. Okay, what fuzzy skin does, it gives texture. So now you can see we've got texture all over that wall. Now we're still in vase mode, so instead of being a smooth wall, you can see it's now fuzzy. If we turn that off, we're now going to have a block of fuzzy skin. So you can actually change all the settings through there as well. Totally up to you to play. I've printed a clock, and the back of the clock I made fuzzy skin, and it looks really, really good like that. So it was often used to try and hide layer lines, but it's almost become a thing on its own now these days. Right, so that's taken you through all the basic settings through the Bambu Labs program. And best thing here is always go and look at your preview. Your preview will give you a lot of information. You can slide these up and down. You can slide the sequins around like that as well. Okay, and that's going to give you a much better idea of what you're actually doing and what you're accomplishing. A lot of people never even look at the preview. They just go ahead and print, and they wonder why things have happened and gone wrong. Preview is a very powerful tool and very much well worth using. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe. I'm going to be making a lot more videos along the line of this. Next time I'm probably going to start tackling some of the advanced settings. They're advanced for a reason. If I pop in there, you'll see that there's a lot more options under each one of these. Later on I'll start tackling objects as well. I did not tackle objects because there's a lot to objects as well. And you can do a lot of editing inside the slicer, which a lot of people don't even use it like that. Anyway, have a great day.